This is a Grease Media production. Hello and welcome back to Grease Media's Careers. This is Sam Baines, your host, and this week we are going to Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. to speak with Alex, who is a lobbyist for the financial sector. In this week, we're going to learn about what it's like to be a lobbyist, how much money you can earn, how you get into the industry, the sort of people that would like the job and the sort of people that would hate the job, and how it impacts your love life, your social life, etc. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. All right, Alex. So, in 1 minute, who are you, how old are you, and what do you do?
Hey, Sam. Good to be back here. So, I am 29. I worked on Capitol Hill after I graduated and spent a year in consulting in New York. And now I'm back in DC and I do government affairs work for a financial services company. And I'm a lobbyist. I lobby for this company and represent their interests on Capitol Hill to lawmakers and staff.
Right. So when you say government affairs, is government affairs just a nice way of saying lobbying, or are there subsects of government affairs?
That's a really good question. Government affairs or government relations can be kind of used interchangeably. And it's kind of like all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares.
Sure.
So you can work in government affairs, but not be lobbying. But if you're lobbying, you're probably working in government affairs. So if you're a former staffer and you work for whether a trade association, doing kind of government affairs work for them, as an in-house lobbyist at a company like a Google or an Amazon, or at a multi-client lobbying firm, you're all within the government affairs, government relations kind of world. However, lobbying as it's actually defined is when you meet on behalf of either yourself or someone else or another entity with a covered government representative. So whether a member of Congress, a regulator, or White House staff, or a congressional staffer, and you advocate for a certain point of view, that is called lobbying. And you will have to, if you're a registered lobbyist, record all of that with the government as time that you spent lobbying. So there's this huge kind of legal framework surrounding lobbying. And a lot of this was because back in kind of the late 90s and early 2000s, lobbying was more or less the Wild West. And
That recently.
There was this one lobbyist named Jack Abramoff who... we're kind of getting away from the crux of
it's good,
this
man.
podcast,
Continue.
but basically he was notorious for bringing members of Congress or staffers to his like Redskins box and treating them to lavish dinners and so they put all of these
being a really nice guy.
Yeah, super nice, and also driving a lot of value for his clients. They put limitations on it after that. There's always
he was the guy. Like there's one individual that changed the entire.
That really, really kind of changed.
Who
everything.
really fucked it up and everyone else.
Brought exposure to
the seedy underworld.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and
part of it is also with social media and the internet kind of also rising at the same time. You have more scrutiny, and you have sites like Open Secrets and the Sunlight Project, where you can see political donations and you can see who is registered to lobby for what company and what their lobbying expenditures are and so on. So there's this whole industry that has sprung up and has been around since the inception of Congress.
Yeah.
Basically representing either political organizations, companies from American or foreign industry, countries, you name it. Anyone who could possibly be some sort of organization probably has a representative in DC advocating for them and their constituents whoever they may be,
Yeah.
to members of Congress and regulators.
So to like dumb that down to its most basic level, Congress makes laws and policies and regulations
Yes.
that have second, third, fourth, fifth order effects across the nation,
Correct.
right? Those third, fourth, fifth order effects can really fuck over companies because now they have to institute some oversight, which now means they're spending more money on it, or they can't make as much money as they used
Correct.
to. Minority groups, that mean that they're the members who are that minority or are registered as that as far as the government is concerned. Now, you know, they don't get access to the welfare they used to or whatever, whatever it is. So we don't trust government to not screw the status quo, which we currently like.
Yes.
So we're going to have a man or a woman on the ground in DC or a firm on the ground in DC who's constantly watching what Congress is looking to do and either in stopping something that might be bad by trying to influence the members who are going to vote yes or no, or trying to introduce something that they want to become a law that benefits them.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Couldn't have put it any better.
Yeah.
A great example of this, if we're kind of sitting within my kind of policy jurisdiction, is after the financial crisis, there was a broad call for Wall Street and the financial sector to be regulated. It was already heavily regulated, but it needed more regulation. And so the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act came out of kind of that whole call to action. Part of it, most of it kind of cleaned up the markets and forced certain financial products to be more heavily scrutinized and so on. Parts of it were seen as overprescriptive. One example of this is there was a threshold by which any bank that is $50 billion or above in assets under management is regulated like it's Goldman Sachs. And so that was incredibly detrimental to small community banks, and small is a relative term here, community banks, regional banks that maybe have those assets under management, but aren't kind of systemic threats to the rest of the financial system like a Goldman or a JP Morgan is. And so they had to play by the same rules and report the same things that these huge companies, these huge banks would report kind of on their time, but didn't have nearly as many resources in their compliance department, in like their legal department, everything. So they're spending the same amount of money to comply with all of these different things and with less manpower, less resources to throw at it. And as a result, it takes longer for them to kind of be issuing loans to small businesses, be kind of acting in the manner that a small bank should be, because they're spending so much time trying to get right with this overprescriptive regulatory kind of regime.
Yeah.
And so one of the big things that whole subset, the whole kind of community and regional banking community pushed for, was to raise, and they employed massive teams of lobbyists to do this, was to push for an amendment to Dodd-Frank, which was S2155 last year. And it raised the threshold of that additional scrutiny from 50 billion to 250 billion. And so
restricted to the big guys.
Yeah. So all the big guys still have that scrutiny, but the smaller guys who don't have the same sort of exposure that the big guys do can now operate in the way that they should be able to operate.
Roger.
And so that's a perfect example of a bill that had adverse effects when it was written, but when it was written, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yeah.
And a broad consensus, because it was a bipartisan bill, had both Republicans and Democrats in the Senate and the House who all voted for it, and it was signed into law by the president. So you had a broad consensus that came together and changed policy to better, equip the American banking system to do business. Right. That's a great example of lobbying in action.
Got you. And lobbying does, as a government affairs, is a more, a less greasy title,
yes,
shall we say. Lobbying as a title has quite a greasy,
yes,
sleazy car salesman vibe about it.
Certainly.
But when you think about the example that you just gave, it's a perfect example of when lobbying doesn't mean that you're trying to do bad to make money. It's an example of lobbying for good, because the more that those smaller banks were able to then operate as they should, the more loans they could give out. The more loans they could give out, the more small businesses they could start. The more small businesses they could start, the more people they could hire, the more people could buy homes, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a world in which you can be a suave dressing, slick talking lobbyist, but be one of the good guys.
Certainly. And there are also groups like, environmental groups that you have advocates who work on your behalf. Two, you have renewable energy groups that push for, hey, we should really invest more in these renewable energies because it's less harmful on the environment. Like, there are advocates, lobbyists widely across every policy spectrum, every industry you could possibly imagine. And part of the reason why it's government affairs and not everyone in there is a lobbyist is sometimes when you're a staffer or a member of Congress, particularly if you're a member of Congress and you leave the Hill and you want to kind of go into advocacy, you are prohibited from lobbying your former colleagues for 2 years. So a lot of them will kind of come in and they'll be consultants or political advisors, but they aren't allowed to actually lobby, as the technical term would imply.
Yeah.
But by and large, it's you are a repository of knowledge, and institutional knowledge and experience downtown that Hill offices, particularly more junior offices, freshmen, people even in their second term, can call upon. And so one of the big parts of government affairs and government relations is going up to the Hill and educating members and staff on certain issues of the day, or telling them about why your company is important to the broader marketplace, or why your company is important to their district, and building relationships and maintaining relationships. And so down the line, if push comes to shove and there's bad policy that has a chance of becoming law, you can go back to these people and say, hey, this would be really detrimental to our industry because of X, Y, and Z reason. Or this would be really detrimental to your district because a whole subset of your constituents would lose jobs as a side effect of this proposal. Yeah. And oftentimes it takes to build a consensus on the Hill. If Republicans can't be seen as talking to Democrats, or Democrats can't be seen as talking to Republicans on some of these issues, sometimes these government affairs groups act as go-betweens, and they build the consensus and know kind of the policy minutia and the kind of the system and the places to best leverage it to get the end desired goal accomplished. So it's almost like you can kind of outsource some of your policy knowledge, because obviously you aren't paid a whole lot on Capitol Hill. And so most institutional knowledge from the Hill will end up downtown in some capacity.
So,
and you can always call upon them.
Yeah.
So if you're sketchy on an issue.
So to put this into perspective, and for those listeners that haven't listened to it yet, Alex did another podcast about being a Hill staffer. One of the points you brought up on that was that you spent a lot of your time rapidly writing one-page summaries of topics that you don't know much about to inform your member on a bill or an amendment or something they're about to go vote on. Because at the end of the day, there's only so many hours in a day, and everyone can't be experts in everything unless we get chips in our head and we can upload ourselves to the internet.
Right.
So you end up writing these memos really quickly that has drastic implications, and you yourself didn't know much about it until you got on Google. So it's all a bit iffy. So where the lobbyist comes in is that the lobbyists are essentially people who make it their job to be really well informed on one specific topic and be able to explain how that one how that industry affects the state of the member who's voting. So, if you do this, it's going to crush this, which will cause this restriction, which means that these businesses can't grow, etc. And so by doing that, the Hill staffers will invite you up to talk to them and be like, hey, I've got to write this paper. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Exactly.
Explain this to me.
Yeah. A great example is right now, because of Facebook and like their Libra cryptocurrency and blockchain technology is getting a whole lot of spotlight on Capitol Hill in a very, very public way. And we saw this in the some of the Google hearings, that there is just not a whole lot of institutional knowledge amongst members or staff, mostly members, on some of these
highly embarrassing some of the questions they ask.
Topics. For instance, one member, I want to say it was Chuck Grassley, was asking the Google CEO about his iPhone, and the Google CEO was like, "That's not our product. We don't make those." And it was just really
good try, but you look like an idiot.
Like you're trying to relate to the kids. Like, hey, you fellow
whatever
kids.
you kids are doing these days with your face tubes.
Yeah. So for instance, in the wake of some of these Hill hearings on Facebook's Libra cryptocurrency and payment system, one of the things that my company, DTCC, has advocated on behalf of is the promise of blockchain technology and kind of the pros of it, the cons of it, the applications, where we are in terms of applying it to, I don't know, the financial system and so on. And I had a chief of staff who said, I know very little about this, but I know my member wants to know more. Can you explain it to me? And I literally went to his office and ran him through basically what it was, gave him a bunch of resources like links and so on. I even sent him a clip of John Oliver does a really funny segment on cryptocurrencies and blockchain, and kind of makes it all, really dumbs it down, but also makes light of it at the same time. And it was tremendously helpful to him. And as we go back into session next month, it will probably continue to be a hot topic, and hopefully that office and that member and his staff will be more up to speed. So to be known as thought leaders in a given discipline, a given policy area, is incredibly advantageous for your company because you're seen as a resource as opposed to someone who's always asking for something. But it's also really helpful for the folks on the Hill because they don't have to go spend hours and hours trying to get right on something on the internet when you know someone you can call who will come up to the Hill immediately and say, like, this is what's going on.
Yeah, right. All right. So if that is what is the job, right? And what I want to come back to the more wider picture of government relations, but this side of it, which is the lobbying side of it, the actual act of lobbying, what sort of people succeed in that? So if I'm a young university student right now and I think I want to be a lobbyist,
yes.
If you were interviewing someone to come on and join you as a junior lobbyist, what sort of personality traits would you be like, this person will succeed with a bit of training, that person, sorry mate, like maybe find a different, work in government affairs, work in the effort, maybe the back office or something, but like you are not the front man on the Hill. It ain't happening.
So a lot of it is interpersonal relationships. And if you're a particularly outgoing person who's well-spoken and quick on their feet and excels at making friends, like wherever you go, you'll do well. If you are a little bit more introverted, you may not do as well, but there are other areas where you can contribute and where you can be just as effective. For instance, when there was tax issues, for instance, most of my office focuses on bigger picture capital markets issues. And we don't understand maybe in a given area the nuances of a certain tax provision. So we bring in our tax expert who, as you can probably imagine, is a little bit less outgoing and is a little bit more kind of wonky or quanty. And you kind of pave the way, you open the door, they come in, they say their thing, and kind of you go from there. So it's not to say that if you aren't outgoing, you won't excel, but it certainly helps. And a lot of the kind of relationship management is it's really social. DC is a very small place, and there's always happy hours and networking events and congressional fundraisers and so on. And you go to these things, you need to be able to work a room, know who you need to talk to, find a way to engage them in conversation, make a good enough impression on your first try that they're like, hey, let's talk more about this. We don't have time, obviously, at this happy hour, but let's get coffee next week and talk more about your issues and why they're important to the senator.
Yeah.
Outgoing people will do well. And
Roger.
it's a really fun job as a result.
Okay, so the next question is, what does the average week for you look like? And along the same lines, if you had to group the sort of tasks that you have to do as part of your job into categories, such as going for coffees, introduce people, researching back office stuff, going on work trips, whatever, how would you categorize what your job basically entails?
It really ebbs and flows, and it has a little bit to do with how big your office is. If you have a huge team, like say Amazon, then you will probably stay focused on a particular issue. And so some weeks may be busier for you than others, and some may not be busy at all.
Yeah.
If you're in a small office like me, you can be extremely busy. And obviously it's all contingent on whether Congress is in session or not. So if they're in session, they're in town, they're doing legislative work, they're hosting fundraisers, all the staff, everyone's in jacket and tie, like it's formal, it's work. When they're in recess, or as they've now retermed it, district work period.
They've retermed it.
It's a rebranding because they are still working. They're going around their district and listening to their constituents. And hearing their woes and what they want done and what they don't want done and so on. So they're still working and they're still out fundraising and so on, but you're back in DC and it's an opportunity to meet with staffers when like the boss isn't around.
Yeah.
So it's more casual and it's a little bit easier to form relationships if you are meeting for a casual coffee or a drink and they don't have to staff a hearing the next day. Right. So an in-session week, there will probably be 2 or 3 hearings, depending on which committees of jurisdiction your company kind of focuses their efforts on. Mm-hmm. So in our case, it's the Senate Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee, and a little bit on the House and Senate Ag Committees and Homeland Security, but mostly the 2 banking committees. And so say they have hearings, we'll cover those. I'll go upstairs.
When you say cover, what do you mean?
Depending on what your week looks like, depending on what other policy work you're working on, that may mean that you're going up to Capitol Hill and sitting in on the hearing itself and kind of showing a presence. A lot of it is kind of just being around and people knowing who you are. Being front of mind. So if you're sitting in like the second row and you've just met with a bunch of staff or members on a certain issue and they see you there, they'll know that it's very important to you.
And they might also remember what you told them. Like, oh yeah, shit.
Exactly.
That guy told me that really interesting thing. I should ask about that.
So a particularly busy week would be like a couple hearings. And then there's obviously whatever comes out of those hearings, you'll have to kind of decide what your company's tack is going to be. So if there was something particularly incendiary or market moving that was said in the hearing, you may have to let your executive team know back in New York or wherever your company's headquarters are, hey, this happens, FYI. And they could be like, okay, well, we need to engage further. And so you plan out your engagement strategy. Or nothing could happen, nothing comes of it, but you kind of let them know nonetheless. So you're in constant communication with your C-suite in the case of like a private company.
Yeah.
There's also congressional fundraisers. So if your company has a political action committee, or if you work for a multi-client firm that donates money through their employees to members of Congress, then you could go to a breakfast or a lunch or a dinner or a reception that is supporting a given candidate for Congress. So whether an incumbent or someone who's running, some PACs, ours included, don't support candidates who are running. We only support incumbents. And so your presence at these fundraising events is a further kind of point of contact for relationship building. You aren't allowed to directly lobby them. So you aren't allowed to, while you're sitting at the table, say like, hey, we really hate this bill because it's really bad. Because that would be directly tying fundraising dollars to a lobbying effort, and that is illegal because of that Jack Abramoff guy.
Yeah.
What you can do, however, and say like, hey, Congressman X, thank you so much for your work on all of the data privacy stuff that's been going on. Like, we really appreciate it. It's an important kind of issue that we've been following. And you can talk to them more like, hey, what are you hearing in your district? And it's just, and you can just shoot the shit with them. You can say like, hey, I don't know, if it's a Arkansas member, you can talk about like Arkansas college football.
Yeah.
It's another point of contact. They know who you are. They're therefore willing to pick up the phone because they know who you are down the line if you need a meeting with them. And so you literally are getting a seat at the table.
Roger.
So I'll go to probably 2 to 3 of these events an evening during an in-session week or a day. So maybe a lunch, a reception, and a dinner. Sometimes I'm doing double duty because we have a small office, and I'll do 2 dinners, and I'll have to like dip out of one and like rush across town to the other one. It's exhausting. There's kind of no getting around that. You really have to be able to kind of be aware of what you're drinking. It's very easy when people are just filling up glasses of wine on the table to kind of get out over your skis.
Yeah, over your skis. Okay.
It's not like a normal job that works late hours that you are just in your office. You're out with people, and you are the face of your company to those members, to the other industry representatives, to staff. You need to put your best foot forward, and therefore the best foot of your company, no matter what. And so it's taxing, certainly, because you're in a social situation, but you're still representing something that is larger than yourself. But it's also rewarding because you're known as that kind of representative, as what you represent to that member of Congress and to their district. So it is a little exhausting to be on every night in like a social setting. But the flip side of it is you get free dinner at super nice places.
Yeah.
and it's fun.
Yeah. And you said earlier that the type of person who is good at this job is an extrovert who likes to make friends and is quite outgoing.
Yes. Now,
at first glance, that might seem like an unfair barrier to entry, right?
Yes.
Like if you are not an extrovert and you're not a likable person, then you will struggle with this. And I can imagine people who think of themselves like that, but well, that's unfair.
Yes.
But when you actually consider what you actually have to do,
yes,
if you're not an outgoing, likable person, you're going to hate the job.
Exactly.
Because your job is to be out every night, not sitting in watching Netflix, playing your video games, or just like having a strict routine, getting up, coming home from work, going to the gym, having a good meal, watching an episode of Netflix and going to bed. You've got to be out constantly schmoozing people on, dressing up, drinking, socializing, being fun, and you can't have an off night.
No.
So it's not a barrier to entry. It's a fucking like, this is the cost to play. And if you don't want to play.
If you don't enjoy that, you're going to hate the job.
Yeah.
Look, you can be a subject matter expert in whatever you want, but if you, and you can be known as such and respected as such if you're like going into offices and talking to them about these issues. But if you're going to be in the real kind of like lobbying, schmoozing circuits, the going out to the dinners, all of that, it's exhausting. December here is known as the December bender because every lobbying firm, every member of Congress, every PAC, every law firm, every trade association has a Christmas or holiday party, and you can have as many as 3 or 4 of them an evening. And
fucking hell,
it starts the very beginning, and there's also all of the hearings and everything, and like the normal course of events that are still going on Capitol Hill. There's just all this shit happening at night. And so from literally the day you get back from Thanksgiving break until Christmas, every single night of the week, there's like 5 things. And you have to go show face at all of them because maybe they're a client of yours. Maybe they're a law firm that does work on your behalf. Maybe they're a member of Congress who you really don't want to piss off. Maybe they're a PAC or they're a member that you're trying to ingratiate yourself with. Like, you need to be present and you need to be on for an entire month straight. And if you aren't like very religious about what you eat and or drink at,
I was going to say, how do you stay in shape?
And you like work out in the mornings, you're screwed up. My first year doing it, I gained 10 pounds in 1 month.
Fucking hell.
And that was not a fun realization. It was super fun, but it was not a fun realization. So it's a job that is made for outgoing people because of the demands of the job.
Yeah.
That's not to say if you're not outgoing, you won't excel, but it is easier and you will probably enjoy it more if you're a person who naturally likes being around other people and kind of socially engaging with them.
This is a sweeping statement. But the whole like gaining weight thing and trying to stay in shape and keep in shape for young women out there who might be interested in lobbying as a career, is that a regular conversation amongst lobbyists and particularly female lobbyists who are very like conscious of this thing or worried about it?
Yes, I feel a little uncomfortable commenting on this.
Yeah.
Just because of the kind of generalizations attached. I will say that of the men and women that I know within government affairs, the women are far more conscious of what they are eating and drinking.
Yeah.
Because of these demands.
Yeah.
Whereas the men, particularly the older ones, are like morbidly obese.
Yeah. They have the exact same problems. They just don't give a fuck. Yeah.
Right.
So if you do lobbying as a long-term career, there is a trend of getting fatter and fatter and fatter and unhealthier as you get
I wouldn't
older.
say that's the rule, but there's certainly a lot of fat lobbyists. And there's a reason why the whole like fat cat lobbyist term is thrown around by people not in DC, because there's a lot of fat lobbyists and they go to dinner with these members of Congress and they drink with them and they drink with their staff and like they get fat. Yeah. And so if you aren't on top, it's like if you apply discipline to the career and if you apply discipline to yourself in a similar manner, you can stay in shape.
Yeah.
My first full year of lobbying, I purposely signed up for 2 triathlons and the New York Marathon so that I would be forced to stay in shape.
Yeah, right.
And because like you can't run a marathon if you like haven't trained. It just won't go well for you and may cause serious irreparable harm to your body.
Yeah.
It's
a serious consideration.
It's a serious consideration.
Especially as younger generations coming through now
are much more health conscious.
A lot more health conscious. Working out is considered a social thing.
Yeah.
Being in shape is a social thing. If your ability to stay in shape is directly linked to your mood and your happiness, then this is a career that probably is not best suited to.
Yeah. And look, like there are exceptions. There are ways around kind of the getting FaceTime with members at boozy dinners. Yeah. You can obviously see them for meetings, but like, for instance,
it's not the same.
It's not the same.
It's really not.
They don't let their guard down, but like
coffee's good. A few drinks is better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are members who will do for fundraising events, workout classes. Like there's like a few female members who have done like yoga or SoulCycle as their fundraising. Congressman Tom Graves of Georgia and minority leader Kevin McCarthy of California do solid core, which is like this wild, crazy ab Pilates sitch. And they do it like every Wednesday morning or something. And there's a few lobbyists who will join them. But like part of me is like, I never want to have one of them see me just like dripping sweat and like looking close to passing out.
Yeah.
But for some lobbyists, that's great FaceTime with them.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
There are ways around all of this, but by and large, if you want to succeed in the government affairs field, you need to be prepared to have your social life basically dominated. Yeah.
Your social life, like there is no,
and
you don't have a work-life balance because your social life and your work life become pretty synonymous.
Yeah. It's you basically need to make all of, It's like make your clients your friends.
Yeah.
You need to interact socially with congressional staff and members of Congress, because then they're going to want to pick up the phone if you have an issue.
Yeah,
If you're friends, they want to help their friends. Regardless of whether you're donating to their campaigns, if they are friends with you, they will help you.
Yeah, right. You mentioned earlier that, the question I asked earlier, we kind of got away from it, but just to like sum it up was that your general week, right?
Yes.
So to sum up the average tasks and duties of a lobbyist is you are going to hearings.
And doing prep for the hearings.
Yeah,
so you may be planting a question for one of the members to ask one of the panelists a day or two prior, and then going to make sure that they ask the question, and then doing follow-up afterwards.
Yeah, there's prep to try and influence what is said or what is asked in the hearings. Mm-hmm. There is going to the hearings. There is the communication after the hearings, which includes one, reporting to the C-suite of your organization and briefing them on what happened and if there'll be any implications for your organization, combined with an engagement strategy of if there are going to be consequences. How are we going to influence or stem the outcome of those consequences by engaging back with the staff? There is back office research, so time spent sitting in a computer, getting into more details, trying to understand the repercussions. Then there is going to events to show face. There are going to events to befriend staffers and members. And then there are times where you travel quite a lot because you have to go to these events where the members in the location where the members are from. So you're going on state travel.
Yes.
So you travel quite a bit, you drink quite a bit, you take a lot of coffees, you sit in on hearings, you do research about the hearings and try and influence the hearings. And quite interestingly, which I want to get into, is you spend a lot of time talking to the C-suite of your company.
Yes.
So if you wanted to if you were a young university student and you wanted to do lobbying as a career, as a first career, let's say, you are going to, at a very young age, be given a lot of responsibility and be exposed to serious decision makers in large companies.
Yes.
That someone, your friend who may have graduated and gone and got an analyst job on Wall Street and thinks he's made it, when really you went to bloody be a lobbying firm for Goldman Sachs and you're the same age and you're reporting to the fucking C-suite. Exactly. So who's got a more important role that's going to set them up and give them the education they need to have a more rapidly successful career? Absolutely.
That sums it up pretty well. You're uniquely positioned at a juncture between the C-suite of your company and policymakers on Capitol Hill. And you can enter into that at a young age. There are people who join these firms right out of college.
How do they go? I was going to ask this. How
often?
What is the age you need to be at least to be taken seriously?
It depends. I would say probably 28 to 30. You're like actually taken seriously. I was definitely on the young end when I was like actually. When I started lobbying when I was 27, and that was like on the young end. Okay. There are younger, there are people who start older, obviously, but my situation was interesting in that when I came back to DC, I slotted into this government affairs office of this firm, and I was the Republican lobbyist. There weren't any others. It was just me, and so I was this 27-year-old who was representing this huge multinational corporation to an entire side of the government.
Roger.
Which is wild.
Yeah. Sink or swim.
Yeah. And that happens. That can totally happen. I mean, the person who started my office, she was brought on with a more senior guy who's probably 40. She was probably 28 at the time. And they started the DC office of our company, and the older guy was fired. And so the DC office was literally just her.
Yeah.
And then just a bunch of consultants. So it can Depends. But there are folks who will like come right out of college and go be like a staff assistant or like a junior policy analyst or researcher at some of these government affairs offices. And you can, if you're savvy and there's some staff turnover and you work hard and you kind of go out and meet people and make good connections like right off the bat and you're a go-getter, it's not uncommon to be able to jump up a few ranks and be hill facing and external facing by age 25, 26. You might not be leading the charge to the hill, but you'll still be out there. I mean, one of my friends who is now the managing director in charge of all of the Hartford's, the insurance companies, all of their government affairs work. She had never worked on the Hill. She went to, I think it was the Hartford when she was like reasonably young, probably like 25, 26. And there was some turnover and all of a sudden she was heading up everything. Now she's a managing director at age 30, which is
right.
She also kicks ass.
That's something,
and she busted her ass to make connections on the Hill, but like it's possible.
That's something that's quite unique about the Washington DC political ecosystem is that the grand majority of executors, and by executors I mean the people who are actually doing and implementing the tasks that the decision makers, the adults make, are 27 to 35. Right? So what that means is that it is not so, and because so much of the job is socializing and making friends, people like to socialize and make friends with people around the same age.
Yes.
So it does, as an Australian who wasn't really exposed to this until about 12 months ago, I was quite surprised to find out that people in serious authority and leadership positions are quite young.
Yes.
Because the reason they are valuable, besides the fact that they are good at their job and they are smart and they know what they're talking about, but the reason they're valuable is because they are friends with the other young decision makers and people in authority who are executing tasks. And the reason they're friends is because they're the same age and they're going to the same parties. So you can become quite a powerful, successful person at a much younger age compared to most ecosystems in the world because of the fact that it's a young person's game. And you're not a young person talking to an old person. The young decision makers are all talking to each other.
Right, exactly. I mean, there's a reason that I would invite them all to, I don't know, house parties I would have. One, I'm friends with them.
Yeah.
But two, they're all in the same place and it's my party.
Yeah.
And obviously we're abiding by gift rules.
Yeah.
They all brought their own beer. And we're all fine with the law. But we're all friends. And you maintain relationships and you make your clients your friends. And so down the line, I need something, they need something. It's a text or a phone call away. Yeah. And if people kind of self-select, right? Like you want to hang out with other young people who are equally as driven and ambitious as you. And those people kind of find each other and you kind of identify, hey, you are kind of a hard worker and a cool guy and like, let's be friends.
Yeah.
And your careers kind of rise at the same rate. And so now you've got all of these former staffers who, like, here's a great example. The head of my government affairs office was Senator Harry Reid's like chief counsel. And his best buddy was also worked in Harry Reid's office. Now, the head of my office is the head of my office. And that best buddy has his own lobbying shop. Who do you think one of our external multi-client firms that we have like on retainer is? It's that guy's firm.
Yeah.
You rise at the same rate. Everyone kind of pops in and out of different jobs. Yeah. So someone might be downtown, someone might be in the Hill, someone might be in administration, and people kind of the places all switch, but the people remain the same, and the relationships stay constant.
Yeah, and to put it another way, you could have, for example, the ex-director of mortgages, I don't know what the fuck you call these things on Wall Street, ex-director of the mortgage portfolio on Wall Street. He or she might be 42 years of age, and they come down to DC, right? but they can be that person, and on Wall Street, they can have that, like, they can be worth a lot of money and have that luster. But at the end of the day, they need you to get the meeting.
Exactly.
Because to get the meeting, you literally need to be booked into the calendar. You don't just call the senator, you call the senator's chief of staff. And who's friends with the senator's chief of staff who can get you in the calendar? It's you. So ultimately, you've got this highly powerful, highly successful senior person coming to you for help, and you're only 28.
Yeah.
It's insane.
And the same thing.
And you get it by texting your mate who you've been going out for drinks and having house parties with.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And the other thing is too, like, oftentimes the member isn't available because they've got something going on the floor, or the person that you're bringing down isn't quite senior enough to merit a member level meeting. And so invariably, like, here's an example. One of our, like, business heads who's like 50 something, he came down with like another guy who also heads up another division of our company, and they were meeting with like a 24-year-old staffer. Yeah. It's hilarious. but those are the decision makers. It's the young people who are writing the policy that the members are then voting on. Yeah. And if you are able to build yourself a big enough network amongst just like young professionals when you're right out of college, by basically just going to happy hours and meeting all of these people and making friends, you're going to be tremendously successful down the line, because all of those people will climb up the rungs and you'll climb up the rungs. And all of a sudden, like, your buddy's the Secretary of State. Yeah. Okay. So if that all makes sense. So so the question I've got now is, if I'm a university student and I'm listening to this podcast and I'm thinking, well, this sounds fucking great. I want to do this job. Now, ultimately, it sounds like you really you want to peak at getting into this at like 27, 28. Yeah. Right? That's when you're in your prime. The three things you can do if your objective is, okay, I'm going to enter this at 27, 28. The things that I think of as what you can do between now and between graduating college and then to prime you to go into this. One is be a staffer. Yes. By being a staffer, you develop relationships on the Hill. You learn how the Hill works. You become an SME. So you're not deep in any one topic, but you know how the Hill works and you have access. So that is your value. Yes. So people will go, an organization will be like, we will hire you for your access and then we'll teach you what we need you to know to do your job. The second one is you might just become a subject matter expert in something. So you might go down the academic route by like working for a think tank and becoming an SME on trade regulation. And so you can then go work as a lobbyist at a trade regulation firm. Exactly. Or a third one might be you go work for a company in the sector. So say, for example, you wanted to be a lobbyist for a company that focused on cybersecurity. Go get a job at a very successful cybersecurity company so that you can talk all the ins and outs of it and then go apply for a lobbyist job. Yeah. Is that accurate? And are there other avenues that I'm missing? Yes. I think you could also lump into the work on the Hill. You could also work on campaigns. Okay. Because it's all relationships with members and staffers and so on. And people pop in and out of campaigns and pop in and out of DC. It's a very transient city. But you're right. I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing that's great about DC is you have this melting pot of industries and people from all over the country. And as a result, you can have basically any career and still do it. You can go work in banking for 10 years and then come down to DC if you really wanted to. If you're working banking for 10 years and you've probably done pretty well for yourself. Yeah. But you could come down here and you could start lobbying at like a financial services focused multi-client firm because you're an expert in that given field. And the relationships can come. Or you can work on the Hill or work kind of around the Hill in like a campaign, have those relationships, and then learn the rest. You can work at like any given like tech company and then move to DC and kind of transition into tech lobbying. Like there are so many different avenues that you can possibly get at that job from. And it's all just willingness to hustle and kind of meet people and make good impressions and kind of make yourself known around town, and persistence. Yeah. And kind of getting creative at how you make your way to one firm or another.
So it's kind of a paradox in the sense that it's a pretty small closed off ecosystem, relatively speaking, and it's like a clique. It's kind of like a high school sort of clique where you're either in the group or you're not in the group. So that would seem like a limiting factor, but paradoxically, there are no limits to getting in.
Exactly,
right?
It's just how
you can come from anywhere.
How creative are you, and how much do you want it?
Yeah. So and once you're in, you're in.
DC is a very funny place
because the longer you're in, the more your value goes up. Exactly. Because the longer you're in, the more people you know.
And then what used to happen is people used to stay on the Hill for like their entire career and then jump out at like, I don't know, age 40 and be paid like a couple mil or something like that.
Yeah.
Like a multi-client firm. And that sometimes still happens, but more often now because millennials tend to jump companies every few years. And also in DC, it's based off of the political cycle. And if every 2 years you've got an entirely new Congress, relationships turn over, members rise and fall. And so too do the relationships that are like kind of dependent on them. So you have people who are jumping from office to office, from firm to firm, from campaign to the Hill, like administration or otherwise. And you can have 4 different jobs in 6 years.
Yeah, right.
And that's not uncommon.
Yeah. Interesting. So if you're doing this job, so one of the things that can cause stress in people's lives is what you're being judged on by your boss as delivery of your deliverables. Like this is at the end of the year when you get your annual review, this is what you're being assessed on. Were you good? Were you not good? Do you get a bonus? Do you not get a bonus? Depending on what industry you're in, Wall Street, for example, is notoriously stressful because of that.
Yes.
Right? Sales can be stressful as well. If you don't bring in new clients, despite the fact that you worked hard all year, then too fucking bad luck. What are the KPIs for your job?
It really depends. I mean, it depends how active
because it's kind of intangible what you're being measured on, right?
It's kind of intangible. Like, I don't know. How do you measure I have X relationships?
Yeah.
Part of it, I mean, what we report, for instance, is we report how many meetings we had with Hill staffers, how many hearings we went to, how many topics did we lobby on. And so you can, how much time did you actually spend lobbying? How many, like, if you're at a law firm, how many hours did you bill effectively?
Yes.
And so you can quantify it in that way. And another good metric, obviously, is like if there's a bill that's in Congress that's going through the House that would be really detrimental to your company, and you manage to somehow kill it or alter it so that it's like a non-factor, you get rewarded.
You're getting a bonus, yeah. I know for a fact that I saved the company $20 billion.
Yeah.
I'll take a bill, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe not quite that much, but sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is a constant battle to justify your existence and your pay because you are not technically a revenue generating branch of whatever company you are working for. But your actions and your efficacy at your job can have significant impact on the bottom line of your company.
Absolutely. Okay. That makes sense. All right. So 2 more questions I want to ask are, one, so we've talked about in government affairs, we've talked about the lobbying capacity, like what you do, right? Because that's what you know well. What other, if you go laterally in the government affairs space, what other components are there of government affairs for people who self-select out and they listen to this podcast? They think to themselves,
that doesn't
5 dinners with clients a night sounds like hell, but I still want to work in government affairs.
Totally.
What are the other categories?
So a great example is another guy in our office, and he is a regulatory global public policy analyst.
Yeah.
And so he's the same age as me. He has like a master's in like international relations or something like that. And he basically focuses on rulemakings of regulators, goings on the Hill, He is entirely desk bound. Like he stays at the office. Like we'll occasionally go out to a hearing or something together, and there's still an important part of the office. But he is more focused on the minutia that's coming out of all the regulatory agencies, and his job is just as important as mine because he's also informing what rulemakings we're going to comment on, what financial policy issues are going to be focused on the Hill as a result of what the regulators are doing.
You're the delivery driver, and he's cooking the meals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and like I will go lobby on something that he figures out, basically.
Yeah.
So it's like a research analyst in a Wall Street bank, to continue with the analogy. Like there are sales and trading guys, and there are guys whose research will basically decide whether a bank will or will not invest in a given company. And they're just as important.
So, okay. So that's in your organization. When you have a multi-firm client, and just for the listeners, define how your organization is different to a multi-firm client. But within a multi-client firm.
Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. Yeah. Yep, I just went full retard. Yep. Within a multi-client firm, I know there are lots of lawyers that go into lobbying. So why does a multi-client firm have lots of lawyers, but your organization has a guy who has a degree in international affairs and a guy who's just a smooth talker again from Wall Street? Like, why are they recruiting lawyers and your firm isn't?
Yeah. So we have lawyers too.
Okay.
We have a whole legal department. We have our regulatory affairs group, and they're all regulatory lawyers. We have regulatory lawyers in our office. So that guy's like of equivalent status with me within the office.
Yeah.
There's lots of lawyers on Capitol Hill, obviously, because it's a kind of reasonable path.
Because you're dealing with laws.
Go work on policy and laws, and then go practice it.
Yes.
And there's plenty of lawyers who have law degrees who don't actually practice law around DC. But ultimately, it's you don't know what you need to engage on without the people who are tracking all of the issues, whether from the regulatory side, from Capitol Hill, or from the administration. If you don't know which way to point your gun, you're not going to be very effective.
Roger. Yep, that makes sense. Okay. And then last question. You're 33. You're now 28. 29. You're 33. 4 years from now, you're tired.
Yeah.
You're over it. Where do lobbyists go next if they don't become an old, fat, obese lobbyist?
It really depends. I mean,
and how much money can be made at both like your level as well as in the future? Like how much, like is it a career where you can make a lot of money, or is it a career you do to set yourself up for the next job where you make a lot of money?
It really depends. It depends on which industry you're lobbying on behalf of. It depends on kind of how senior you are and the connections you have and how effective you are at your job. It's entirely possible to make, I don't know, $200,000 by age 30.
Really?
Like salary wise.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I didn't know that.
I mean, you can, if you go work in like banking or tech, you can probably make $150,000 if like you're a 28-year-old associate.
Wow.
It's possible.
Yeah.
And then again, like if you're
So one last question, for a bit of fun. What is the dating life like as being a lobbyist, considering your job and what you have to do?
It's complicated. I mean, sometimes it's difficult to find the time during the week to go out on dates.
Yeah, good point. And beyond dates, how does this job affect your social life for good or for bad?
I mean, look, you're really social, and there's a bunch of really interesting young people in DC, both male and female. So you're going to meet a lot of people.
Yeah.
I met my girlfriend through politics. There are many folks who work in politics who meet their significant other through politics, whether they, I don't know, lobby their office and like walked in, they're like, hey, you're pretty, and here's my number.
Yeah.
Or they worked on a campaign together, or like there are things that force people together in one way or another. and a lot of relationships kind of blossom out of that. You can meet a lot of different people, but you also kind of have to be careful, because if you are rude to someone and you have business before their office next week, and you're going to see them, that's bad. So it's a very small town, and it's a big dating pool, but it's not that big. Yeah. And everyone knows everyone.
It's basically just college on one campus.
Exactly. Yeah. And you never know who might end up in a position of power that you need to do business with. Yeah. So I don't know.
So if I'm rude to them now, it might seem like there's no repercussions, but 2 years from now, there may be major repercussions.
Say someone's the chief of staff or the scheduler, and you got on a date with them and you didn't call them back.
Yeah.
They might turn down your meeting.
Yes.
You really need to get in front of them.
That's fascinating.
The best example of this is Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer, the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader. They hate each other. And apparently it all stems back to when they were interns on Capitol Hill together, and they went out on a date, and Steny never called Nancy.
Oh my God.
And I'll leave it with that.
Yeah. I guess it's as good a note as any to end on. Yeah. All right. Awesome, Alex. Thanks for having me.
I got to pay.
All right, guys, I hope you really enjoyed that interview with Alex, who, as you can tell, is an extremely impressive young man and articulate and speaks well. And, you know, it's quite rare, actually, that you find someone who has taken the time to really consider their industry and their job and their field from the perspective that Alex has. So you're quite lucky to get those insights from such a considered, articulate individual. So very quickly, over the course of about 5-10 minutes, I'm going to quickly sum up the key takeaways I took away from that interview with Alex, based off the information you would need if you were considering or excited about the prospect of getting into lobbying. So first things first, what do you actually do on a day-to-day basis as a lobbyist? What is the actual job? So you heard Alex discuss it. What you essentially do on a day-to-day basis as a lobbyist is your job is to be front of mind in terms of the staffers and the members who are voting on the Hill. So what that essentially means is that you, as a representative of your company or your organization, have to track policy changes that are going to affect your organization. Either it's going to create a new rule that stops you from doing business as usual, or you want to create a rule that provides the company or the organization the opportunity to expand its business and its capabilities. So what this revolves a lot of back office research. So as a lobbyist, you'll be responsible for doing research and understanding the topic in detail so that you can talk about it intelligently. Once you understand the topic research, you then go into the next part of the day-to-day job, which is to attend briefings. So when they're briefing and they're making decisions on the Hill about this topic, your job is to go there, see what happens, report what happens back to your company, as well as make sure that the members or staffers that are there see that you're there so they know it's important to you and your organization. The next thing you do is you then educate the staffers. So staffers don't have all the time in the world to understand this topic the way you do. So your job is to maintain relationships with staffers and members on the Hill so that when they want to know about a topic, rather than having to do the research themselves, they call you up, you come into their office and you educate them. They know you're going to have a jaded perspective because obviously you have an agenda, but with that agenda will come a lot of insight that saves them a lot of time. The next thing you do is you then have to do a lot of coffees. So part of lobbying is meeting up with a lot of people, being staffers, people on the Hill, other people in the industry, for coffees to maintain relationships, which also builds into dinners. So you have to go out for dinners with these people, attend fundraising dinners, go for drinks, etc. And then there's a lot of interstate travel, because when the members aren't in DC, they might go back to their state and you might need to follow them to their state because it might be important for your job. So that's kind of the day-to-day tasks that you would do as a lobbyist. So if you want to look at those two tasks and put them into two broad categories, there are two things you essentially do. One is you ask staffers and members on the Hill for things. You go up there and you say, hey, I would really appreciate it if you voted this way on this bill for this reason, etc. And this is why I think you should do it because it's important to you. But the other side of it is that you are an information source for them, and you are a thought leader for them. So think of it as you ask for things, but you also provide them things. So your job as a lobbyist is to maintain a healthy balance of that so that they are willing to do some of the things you ask for because you have been good in giving them all the things they ask from you. The next thing I want to cover is the different ways in which you can enter this career. So the key ways in which Alex covered are, 1, you can be a staffer. By becoming a staffer on the Hill first, you basically develop the relationships, you understand how the Hill works, and just that insight, experience, and contacts makes you valuable to a lobbying firm that wants to use you to get access back to your previous peers, so you can lobby something. So become a staffer and then leave being a staffer and become a lobbyist. The second way you can get into it is to be working on political campaigns, because by working on political campaigns, again, you're working with the people who are staffers. So it's another way in which you develop those relationships and those networks. A third way you get into the field is being a subject matter expert. So, for example, if I want to work for a big tech firm like Google or Facebook and I want to lobby on data privacy, if I have come from a Google or a Facebook previously and I have been a subject matter expert inside their organization about handling data and how we do it and know it in and out, then that makes me very attractive to a lobbying firm or the lobbying branch of one of these companies who then wants to use me to go and educate people on the Hill about how we actually do that. All right, the next key point I found very interesting from Alex's talk is the ecosystem itself. So we spent a lot of time at detail talking about the fact that lobbying and the Hill is a ecosystem of young people. So regardless of how you get into the industry, whether you're a campaign staff member, you are a Capitol Hill staff member, you're a subject matter expert from the industry, etc., at the end of the day, you can get into lobbying and the government affairs ecosystem from many different backgrounds and experience sets. But getting in is the hard part, because it is like a college campus where a lot of these young people in these different positions are friends, they party together, they drink together, etc., all in ways that are legal, so it's not a bit sketchy. So getting into the ecosystem can be hard because it's a clique, but ironically, you can get into the ecosystem from any background in any which way. And once you're in, your value only increases, because as your relationships enhance with these people, with the people in the ecosystem, then your access enhances and thus your value increases. Okay, the next key detail that came out of this is being a lobbyist can be a fast track to expediting your success in the modern corporate world. Why is that? Because lobbying teams are quite small and they report directly to the C-suite of companies. So if I'm the CEO, if I'm Tim Cook, if I'm the CEO of Apple, for example, then I am constantly, a big part of my job is understanding how federal regulations are going to impact my business, because it can have huge impacts on the financial health of the company. Therefore, I get reports regularly from the lobbying team. And as lobbying teams are small, Tim Cook might get a report from the head of the Government Affairs Department of Apple, and then a 28-year-old might be the 2IC to the head of Government Affairs. So, and you'll be involved in those meetings. So at a very young age, you are working with the C-suite of major corporations and thus developing relationships with them and understanding what they think about, how they talk and how they work. This insight will give you the confidence to be able to work with these people going forward, which will make you better at your job and thus accelerate how quickly you will climb the corporate ladder in modern America, modern Australia, modern Canada, modern UK, etc. So a major benefit of lobbying is access to and working alongside titans of industry at a very young age, far earlier than if you went and worked as an entry-level role on Wall Street or in a PR firm, etc. All right, so that is the professional benefits. Now let's look at the lifestyle benefits. At the end of the day, being a lobbyist is a fun job. If you like going out and meeting people, you like having interesting conversations, you get along well with people, you find it easy to make friends, you have a bit of charm, and you enjoy just being part of the scene and being in the know and feeling like, you're a bit of a mover and shaker in this world, then being a lobbyist is for you. The downside of this job is that if you aren't one of these people, you will hate it. The idea that you have to go and party when you might not be in the mood of partying. You have to go talk to people that you don't really want to talk to. You find it hard to stay in shape because with all this partying becomes a lot of food and a lot of drinking that, you might struggle to then stay in shape. So if you are someone who actually cares about your figure and how you look, then lobbying won't be a job that you will be happy with for long periods of time. The other downside of it is that your work and your social life become one and the same. So the people you work with are the people you socialize with. So if you're the sort of person who doesn't like to mix work with play, because you like to be able to be a very different person with your friends than you are when it comes to your professional work environment, you might struggle in this environment. Another downside is that you do not get to see the fruit of your labor. So lobbying is one of those jobs where you don't build something, you don't produce something, you don't draw something, you don't make something, you don't code something that you can then see what you did. What you did is actually quite intangible. So you don't get the fruits of you cannot see, play with, touch, smell, feel the fruit of your labor, the efforts of your hard work. So if you're someone who needs that and values that, then lobbying will not be the career for you. And the other downside of it all is it's just exhausting, man. So, as you heard Alex said, you might have in December, now granted it's only 1 month of the year, but in December you might have 3 to 4 parties a night and you need to dress up in fancy clothes, you need to rush between the parties. And so it can be exhausting, it can take a huge impact on your waistline, and you might not like that lifestyle. So if that sounds like something, that all sounds terrible to you, then self-select out of this career. Coming off that, relationships. The impact this has on your lifestyle, your romantic relationships can be quite hard because the people you are mixing with are also the people that you work with, and the people that you work with are people that are going to continue to work in this field, in this sector for years to come. So if you are someone who treats your relationships like Dixie cups that you just use and throw away, you're not going to do well in this industry because you might go on a date with a man or a woman, treat them like shit, and then a year later, need to get access to an office on the hill and they are in the team and they hate you and now you cannot get access to that office. So there are repercussions to your romantic relationships in this sector if you're not careful. Okay, let's look at the salary. As Alex said, you can make over 150K in lobbying by the late 20s if you're good at it, and 200K by 30. So you can make very, very good money, especially if you work for one of the big lobbying firms that have a lot of money, such as big tech or finance, etc. So the capability to make really good money at a young age is there, while also developing your relationships and your power in this world, if power is something you care about. All right, so I think that sums it up. That's basically lobbying in a nutshell. I hope you really enjoyed this podcast and learned a lot from it. I did. I've been working in DC for about 4.5 years now, and there was a lot of information in there that even I didn't know, which you could probably pick up by some of my exasperation throughout the pod. Anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, enjoy. Cheers.